Any involvement of a foreign government in the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil is an unacceptable violation of our sovereignty. In the strongest possible terms, I continue to urge the government of India to cooperate with Canada to get to the bottom of this matter.
The issue of safe havens and places to operate is being provided abroad, including in Canada. We would expect that that is the main focus. The question is, do we have the political will to address terrorism, or we want to justify it and condone it?
I believe it's a very baseless information. India had never been involved in such activities. India has always condemned Pakistan-backed militancy. India is the one country which is victim of militancy. And India has been calling international community to define the definition of a terrorist.
मैं कनाडा सरकार से कहना चाहूँगा कि कुछ मुट्ठी भर जो लोग माहौल बिगाड़ने का काम कर रहे हैं, उन पर जल्दी से अंकुश लगाए, उन पर कार्रवाई करे। भारत जो है सदैव शांति में विश्वास करता है, सद्भावना में विश्वास करता है। भारत पूरी दुनिया को एक परिवार के रूप में मानता है।
Joining us now on the big talking point tonight on Brass Tacks, it's been exactly a week since Justin Trudeau made these rather dramatic allegations, but so far no evidence has been placed in the public domain. Terry Miliuski is the author of Blood for Blood, 50 Years of the Global Khalistan Project. Professor Walter Ladwick is a senior lecturer of international affairs at the King's College in London. Professor Bharat Karnad, foreign affairs expert here in Delhi. Rajiv Dogra, former diplomat, joining us, and Manjinder Singh Sirsa is national secretary with the BJP. Terry Miliuski, let me start with you. Exactly last Monday, Mr. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, rose in Parliament and made those dramatic allegations. Over the last 1 week, we are yet to hear what is it that he has in terms of credible evidence or proof to back these allegations. Why is it that Canada has not placed any of this material in the public domain? And the word that we're getting in from the government of India, from the Prime Minister's office, from the National Security Advisor's office, from the Foreign Ministry, is that so far, either after his comments or before, there is nothing by way of evidence that's been shared with the Indian side.
I wish I had an explanation, but I'm afraid to say that I do not. The Canadian side is still reluctant to share the evidence that it has. All I can say to you is that I'm pretty sure that the Canadians will not be saying they had shared the details at the official level for weeks before the G20 summit in New Delhi. The Canadians say that they did indeed give specific information, including telephone numbers of the wiretaps that they allegedly received. Now, the Indians may reject this evidence. They may say it's not credible. Trudeau, of course, says it is. But what we have not heard yet is from Prime Minister Modi to say, okay, Trudeau's not telling you what the evidence is because it's nonsense. But I know what it is. It's inconceivable that he would have rejected the Canadian claims unless he knew what they were. So why couldn't he just step up and say, okay, he won't talk because this is nonsense. But I know what he's talking about, and here's why it's nonsense. That would end the matter. I mean, that would be game over. Victory for Prime Minister Modi if he were to do that. But for some reason, he's chosen not to. I just find that curious.
No,
but
that's probably because by going public, I think Justin Trudeau has, in a sense, thrown the ball at the court of the Indian side, but it is he who chose to go public, and I guess the onus is on him to make public if he has any evidence.
I agree with you.
But let me ask Manjinder Singh Sirsa. Mr. Sirsa, the BJP so far has, yes, one diplomat was expelled, one diplomat from the Canadian mission here was expelled. The visas, I think that's where the real sort of worry seems to be, that India has halted visas for Canadians wishing to travel to India. Canada has so far not announced anything, but if they were to reduce their diplomatic staff, as has been asked by the Foreign Ministry spokesperson last week, then that will just be an excuse for Canada also to reduce the number of visas being given to Indians. As a representative from Punjab and a politician from Punjab, don't you worry that that could be a point of concern for lakhs and lakhs of Punjabis, many of whom aspire to go to Canada?
I'm sorry, is that directed at me?
Mr. Sirsa,
it's
Mr.
a
Sirsa, yeah,
point
thank
for
you.
concern for us.
Yeah.
Definitely, it's a point. It's a concern for us also. But at the same point, when they have expelled our diplomat from Canada, we also get short of manpower there. And secondly, Canada should come out with clean hands. See, it can't be both things going together. Do we understand there is a big challenge for Punjabis, especially for students who have paid lakhs rupees as a fees and waiting for the visa? They need their applications to be processed as early as possible. So these are the very big challenges which we are facing day by day. But at the same time, the biggest challenge here is the way Canada has put up its point without any evidence and tried not to defame just India but also Punjabis across the world. We have been branded as a terrorist across the world by their one statement. So this is the biggest concern for us also, and I think Canada should come out with the clean hands and should feel that the statement given by them has went wrong. And today also you see what happened yesterday also what happened in Canadian Parliament. Again there was a goof, because Trudeau is hell bent upon to get some kind of his negativity away, but he's getting more negativity by doing this kind of things. One day he blamed India, and today what he did, as entire Russia is talking about that, what they did, glorifying this kind of terrorism in a parliament itself. It shows that what is the sick mind of the Prime Minister of Canada. I'm sorry to say, but this shows what kind of mindset this Prime Minister has.
Rajiv Dogra, I think that's a fair point that Manjinder Singh Sirsa is making, because they had this absolutely embarrassing event where they brought in a Nazi veteran to the Canadian Parliament and were feting him, and people were applauding him, only to realize that who they thought he was not what he actually was. And, then again, there was this whole back and forth between the Prime Minister's office there and the Speaker's office. The Prime Minister's office saying it's the Speaker's office that was responsible for this guest. The Speaker's office apologizing. It goes to show that either they are not, being taken diplomatically seriously, or they have this rather laissez-faire that they can do whatever and get away with it and there won't be any consequences. Of course, there will be consequences, whether it is accusing India publicly or whether it is this, publicly felicitating and fitting a former Nazi veteran.
Saka, you are being diplomatic. Let me be blunt. I think last 1 week has shown incompetence at every level under Justin Trudeau's administration. His minister, who is responsible for granting citizenship, did not know when Nijjar was granted citizenship by him. First he said 2015, then someone must have told him that, look, we have to backdate it because there was an Interpol notice which was issued in 2014. So next day he says, cancel my last announcement, it was 2007. So similarly in this case, where they've got huge egg on their face, an entire country plus Poland is red hot angry against Trudeau, because this man has been living in Canada for dozens of years without any question being asked, and to top it all, he is being celebrated as a hero for having murdered thousands of Poles and thousands of Jews during the Second World War as a Nazi collaborator. So obviously there is something very wrong. And something very wrong does not go back to last Monday, but it antedates that, because Canadians are very angry with the way he has ignored Chinese misdoings in Canada. They interfered in 2 elections, I think in 2019 and then 2021. But Trudeau was far too scared of China to do anything about it. Just as he's been scared of Pakistan's ISI, who murdered a human rights activist called Miss Baloch in Canada. So he is very uncertain of himself, and now during the last 1 week he's got into a political swamp from which he doesn't know how to get out
Professor
of.
Ladwig,
but the major point from India's point of view,
I think Ambassador Dogra has a point there, because in the last election, and you're aware of this, Trudeau made this whole business of Chinese interference in Canadian affairs a big talking point. In fact, many say that was a big sort of issue on which he campaigned and an issue on which he managed to sort of rally not just his voters but also voters on the left of center of Canadian politics. But since he came back to power in 2021, after that election, he's completely forgotten about Chinese interference. In fact, Canada also got into this whole prisoner swap arrangement with the daughter of the Huawei founder, Meng Wanzhou, who was released in return for 2 Canadian nationals. So basically going soft on China after the election and after he came back for a second term. And now, is he hoping to do the same thing with India as well by ratcheting up so publicly, accusing the Indian government and Indian government officials in the murder of a Canadian national on Canadian soil? Is he trying to make a China out of India as well, at least from domestic political considerations?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that Canada's relations with China are incredibly poor, and they have gotten worse and worse and worse over time. Yes, there was the prisoner swap deal after the Chinese took hostages, Canadian diplomats on sabbatical as hostages in an attempt to get the daughter of the Huawei founder back. I do think these prior episodes have made Canadians and Canadian officials more sensitive to the idea of other countries influencing their diasporic communities, and I'm certain that this case is seen through the possibly seen through the lens of China. I'd also say that we have multiple media reports that indicate it was actually the imminent release of information about this episode and investigation in Canadian news that forced the Prime Minister's hand. I don't know that he necessarily wanted to release it in the way he did, but my understanding is that this was about to be broken by several Canadian outlets, and therefore the issue came to a head. Not that this was a strategic calculation to reveal it when he did.
Okay, let me ask Bharat Karnad this. Again, we had over the weekend a New York Times report, as well as, of course, that prior to that, there was David Cohen, who's the U.S. ambassador to Canada, who said it was one of the Five Eyes allies who initially provided the intel, and the New York Times identifying that ally as the United States, who first provided the intel to Canada. As Professor Ladwig was saying, do you think A, fear of the story leaking to the press, and B, the fact that the United States gave this to Canada first, sort of forced Trudeau's hand to go public? Because it doesn't fully explain why he decided to go so public in such a dramatic fashion, making such a dramatic allegation.
No, I think, look, Justin Trudeau is something of a dilettante. He is a light-headed dilettante who suffers from an entitlement syndrome. His father was Pierre Trudeau, who actually was the first Canadian Prime Minister to be very soft on the Sikh separatist movement. And that's been, that's the sort of legacy he has passed on to his son, who doesn't seem to have much of a political instinct of his own. The point, I think, is he's done this for political electoral reasons. The elections are coming up. It can be called any time before 2025, October 2025. And of course, he's on a losing kind of an end. That's what the pollsters say. That's what the opposition is really pushing him to the wall to get him to announce general elections. And that's the real point. He needs the Sikh vote that can be marshaled by these Khalistanis who have captured these gurdwaras both on the western and the eastern seaboards of Canada, and who have been actually a thorn in the side of India. And the fact that the Canadian government has deliberately ignored and disregarded the evidence provided by the Indian government over the years, they've been rather la-di-da about it. And now they find that what they thought was a punching bag has hit back at them. And so, now Justin Trudeau naturally doesn't know what to do about it.
So let me ask Manjinder Singh Sirsa, it's not just Canada. There are a bunch of at least a dozen plus Khalistani separatists and Khalistani terrorists who've been wanted for numerous crimes here in India, some of them in UK, some of them based in US, some of them based in Australia. There are lookout notices against some of them. There are Interpol Red Corner notices against some of them. And yet, the government of India is not able to bring any of these people back.
No, there are two different things. One is that there is a lookout notice for someone who is not identified or who we just know that he is living in a particular country, but we are not aware of his complete details. But here is a different case. When it comes to Canada, there are kind of people who are living in Canada with a proper address and their details, and also claiming that they had killed innocent people in India. I'll give you evidence of one of this. Sidhu Moosewala, very renowned singer, was killed in India just a months back. So who was his killer? His killer sitting there, Mr. Brad, he's there very much in Canada and giving interviews on national channels, coming out and saying, yes, we have killed him because we got this message that this has to be killed. We have killed him. So the person who is claiming on the soil of Canada that I have made somebody kill that person, he's enjoying the luxury there in Canada, and Canadian government says, no, we are a very fair country, we believe in equality, we belong equality. This is not equality, neither this is any voice that you believe in this. This is a fair case of a terrorism, of a killing, of a mafia or a don and a gun culture, and you are promoting that, and people sitting there giving a live interviews on national channels. So there is a difference between, when it comes to USA, I must appreciate one thing for US. US will not tolerate even a single kind of a crime case there. There were cases when the dossier was given to USA, those people were handed to the Indian government. I don't believe that after 9/11 USA will ever, even their dreams, wildest dream, would ever support any kind of a terrorist activity. But I do not understand what about Canada. You see what will be the future of this Canada. They will be the same as Pakistan, I must say here. And it is not that things have started worse there in Canada itself. People are killed. Now Justin Trudeau says that this particular person has been killed by the Indian agencies. Okay, tell me, after his statement in the parliament, very next day another gangster was killed there in Canada. Who killed that gangster now? Even he was from India. You never said that this. Now who killed this gangster? Whether your government killed, whether Indian people killed, or your people. The thing is that gangsters are very much in Canada, and they are enemies to each other, and they are killing each other.
No, it's entirely possible, and I think Mr. Sirsa is absolutely right, Terry Miliuski. It's entirely possible that what ultimately cost Nijjar his life were these gang wars, and British Columbia is infamous for these gang wars. But the Prime Minister of Canada chose to inflate a gang war into this diplomatic sort of standoff, perhaps the biggest crisis that India and Canada have faced in the diplomatic relationship in the last 40 years since the bombing of the Air India flights. The point is that either you go public if you have evidence to back those claims, or you try and do it through back channels. Now we have reports that it was the US that provided the initial intel as part of one of the Five Eyes alliance partners. But the US, publicly at least, Mr. Miliuski, has been very, very careful in what it says about this case, saying, Canada is where the alleged crime happened. They are the ones who are investigating. All we are asking India is to cooperate with that probe. They've not said a word condemning or publicly naming and shaming India or Indian government officials. They've been very, very circumspect with their public comments since Trudeau made those allegations.
I agree with you that they have been circumspect, although not to the point of disavowing what Canada is doing. Quite the contrary. They have stepped up and said, we are with Canada on this. We want to see a full investigation. These are serious allegations. And we have cooperated with Canada by supplying intelligence, not perhaps the key intelligence, the smoking gun intelligence that Canada claims to have, but that provides context. At least that's what we're hearing from the current leaks at the White House. But there is what's not being discussed enough, it seems to me, is how do we find a way out of this? And I think both sides, not just the Canadian side, both sides need to get a bit more serious. On the Canadian side, they need to be much more serious about accepting, acknowledging. Listen to what your guests are saying today, acknowledging that Canada has been far too complacent, feeble, weak on this file, and allowing Khalistanis to put up martyr poke. This has been going on for 20 years. It's not just Trudeau, This has been going on for 20 years. They've had pictures of the Air India bomber up as a great martyr at the Gurdwara in Surrey, British Columbia. And now this has all been normalized. We've talked about this before. So Canada needs to be much more hard-headed and serious about realizing that this is a serious threat and that they should be cooperating more with India in getting rid of these people when they cross the line. But India has not got a great record of providing detailed information to Canada that would meet Canadian legal standards. I mean, they say make all these charges about Mr. Nijjar. Where are the criminal convictions? Where is the evidence? Where are the extradition requests? India's been basically taking the attitude that Canada, when India says jump, that Canada should say how high. We should just snap to attention and accept what India says. No, you have to provide concrete evidence that will meet our standards. Having said all of that, it seems to me that the first step has to be Canada accepting the Indian point of view that we're going to stop this indulgence. We're not going to be having assassination dioramas parading through the streets of Toronto. We're going to make some laws about the glorification of terrorism. Far too late, but we're going to get it. I think the Canadians could do that, and that would warm up the situation with the Indians.
I said this last week, and I stand by it.
Here, let's talk.
Instead of the float of Indira Gandhi's assassination that was there in Brampton, I think a few months ago, if there were to be a float of the Twin Towers in New York, and the 9/11 bombers ramming an aircraft into the Twin Towers, would that be acceptable? I mean, all hell would have broken loose, right? All hell would have broken loose if anything of that sort happened anywhere in the civilized world. But Rajiv Dogra, I think, please answer the point that Terry Miliuski is raising. His contention is, yes, NIA has given dossiers. There are, about 18 or 19 of these guys who are in different parts, some in the UK, some in Australia, some in Canada. They are all claiming that the evidence has to be perused by a court of law, and a court of law has to find that evidence convincing enough to convict these people. And short of that, no government will want to extradite citizens of their country, howsoever big the crime they are alleged to have done. Rajiv.
Isn't there an irony in all this? I have full respect for your guest from Canada, but the very fact that they're demanding more and more dossiers reminds one of the demands made by Pakistan. Every time there's an act of terror in India, Pakistan simply keeps on demanding more and more dossiers so as to, make India forget that a crime had taken place on its soil. So similarly, how much of a dossier can any country, including America or Canada itself, provide when the crime has taken place on their soil? India can only provide the elements which led to a murder on its soil, which it did. But it cannot go beyond a certain amount of proof. I mean, you cannot have videograph of a person being killed, which you can send to Canada so that they can see it at its ease.
No, but when they say, Rajiv Dogra, you've been an ambassador. So when they say that they have intercepts of quote-unquote diplomatic chatter involving certain individuals in Indian missions in Canada, does that add up to proof?
No, it does not, because you might be indulging in loose talks. Even diplomats can sometimes talk casually, not about murder, but about things which they should be a little more careful about. So is that proof enough? I mean, just like Canada is saying, give us more proof. Why don't they make those intercepts public? Firstly, is it normal for a civilized country to wiretap another country's diplomats on what is called a foreign soil? After all, embassies are foreign soils in any country, anywhere in the world. But the point I wish to make also is, in context of what you asked, Zaka, is India has been consistent in saying that no proof, no information, no evidence has been given to us of Indian involvement. This morning, media and you yourself have mentioned that there is absolutely no evidence which was given to India either before G20, during G20 or thereafter, or after last Monday. So why does Canada fight shy of saying that, look, these are the papers we gave to India?
Okay. Mr. Sirsa wanted to make a point, and then after that, Professor Ledwig and Professor Karnad. Mr. Sirsa.
Sir, I just want to tell you two things. You are talking about the evidence. When Canada says that we have evidence and a chat evidence, if they feel so that a chat evidence is enough to provide to throw out our diplomat and to say in a parliament that they are killers, then I think more than that evidence is important evidence when some of the citizen of Canadians sitting on the their soil says that we have killed this person. I think that is more credible evidence than this evidence, but they do not want to act on that evidence when somebody says, yes, I have made that person killed. So I'm shocked about the Canadian policy. Somebody sitting there is saying that I have killed someone. They say this is not a sufficient evidence to prosecute him and to send him back to India. But this chat is a sufficient. But anyways, second, the most important thing here is I want to remind you about the yesterday incident there in Canada. If you see, the Canadian government, what media was telling, has issued an advisory and issued an order that all those hoardings where Indian diplomats' names and pictures were said and they were threatened to be killed or to be harmed there, they should be immediately removed. Now tell me, what happened suddenly? Why did Canadian government suddenly realize that this is an act of a terrorism and it has to be removed? Why they were silent from last so many days or so many months or so many years? They were not withdrawing it because they knew that we are on a back foot. We have done something wrong, it should not be tolerated, and nobody in this world will tolerate this kind of act of terrorism. So that is the reason they are forced to withdraw it. And now what more evidence do you want when simply you have such kind of evidence which you yourself are asking your government people to withdraw that and to remove that kind of hoarding?
Professor Ladbeck, you know, the problem is Nijjar was killed, I think, in the middle of June. It's been, what, close to 5 months now since that killing happened. Nobody has been charged. There's been no arraignment of any kind. No people have been identified for this crime. And yet the Prime Minister of Canada chose to go in Parliament and publicly make allegations of such a grave nature against a fellow democracy. Surely, if the investigation had reached a stage where they can say with some degree of certainty that yes, there was Indian involvement or Indian agents were involved, that should find resonance in a charge sheet. That should find that should be, you know, put out as a document in a court of law. We don't see any of that. Like I said, not one person has been identified or named for this crime 5 months since it happened.
Well, I think one of the things we have to keep in mind, as the ambassador has already pointed out, the difference between the standard of evidence required for criminal prosecution and the standard of evidence for making judgments in intelligence type cases. It might be the case that as this investigation began to lead, as the Canadians allege, towards some sort of question of involvement by the government of India, that they chose to pursue that. I think I share your puzzlement and frustration at the lack of details or facts that have been released by the Canadian government. One possible supposition is that if an important component of their evidentiary base came from the United States via their Five Eyes partnership, it might not be so easy for the Canadians to sort of reveal or declassify that without the permission of the Americans. We Canadian media has reported that Prime Minister Trudeau raised this issue directly with Prime Minister Modi and that there were no denials. But you would think that there would be more specificity. Possibly this is part of the diplomatic wrangling, which is to say that if charge sheets would be produced and if people were actually named, this crisis would potentially go to another level and perhaps, and this is just supposition on my part, but perhaps one of the reasons why that hasn't happened is because, the Canadians are looking for some sort of way to diffuse this.
Okay. What may that way to diffuse be? Because, Professor Bharat Karnal, I'll give you the final word. Because when you go public, you are sending out a sign that you are climbing up the escalation ladder. And clearly, the first move in this case was made by Canada. Subsequently, they expelled one diplomat. India matched that tit for tat. And then there was these changes in travel advisories. Again, both countries did that. And then India went ahead and halted visas. Canada so far hasn't, but I suspect if their diplomatic staff are going to be reduced in the mission in Delhi, then that's a backdoor way of saying, okay, we can't issue as many visas. So I think that will also be on the reciprocal basis. But I think the way out generally happens back channel, generally happens when there isn't as much public glare on issues of this kind. That we haven't seen from either side. A move to try and move all of this conversation into the back channels. As far as we know, there's been no back channel communication between India and Canada since Monday last when these allegations were made public.
Well, look, once Justin Trudeau decided to go public, then it's very hard for either party to then go back to the back channel. And that's a fact of life, because then the issue is already compounded in ways that cannot be then reverted back to where you could have corrected the thing in the first place. But the discussion you are having, I think, begs the question whether assassinations by state, by any state in a foreign country, is something new or unusual. I mean, this is, assassinations have been virtually a norm in diplomatic history and the history of nations. And it's no big deal. And the biggest perpetrators have been actually CIA, MI6 and so on. Raw is merely assuming what everybody's talking about, the Raw's involvement is actually correct. And I doubt very much that that's the case. You would have the perpetrators, the major ones like CIA and MI6 and so on, and the record they have, and how India has suffered, incidentally. Central Intelligence Agency operative killed Homi Bhabha when he put a timed explosive on the Air India flight to Geneva. The aircraft was called Kanchenjunga, and that crashed into Mont Blanc. And of course, the US did that to further its non-proliferation goal. So if you're going to be cold-blooded about things and trying to harm citizens of other countries who are not terrorists, but who need to be done away with to further your foreign policy goals, then you have a problem, do you not? When you bring up something like
case,
the Nijjar issue,
at least
who is really a gangster, common
side
criminal and terrorist
was
rolled
that
into
Nijjar
one.
was a branded terrorist. He was wanted in multiple cases. There was an Interpol Red Corner notice against him, and there was no visible attempt by Canada to try and either bring him to justice or even, for that matter, try to extradite him back to India, where he can face the law and face justice for the crimes that he's accused of. But anyway, we'll leave it at that. Like I said, there has been seemingly no resolution in sight 1 week since Justin Trudeau made those public and very dramatic allegations. I want to thank all our guests, Mr. Sirsa, Ambassador Dogra, Professor Karnar, Professor Ladwig, and of course, Terry Miliuski for joining us. We'll see how this plays out. Like I said, diplomatically, there is a lot of fire and brimstone going on between Ottawa and New Delhi right now. Perhaps the need of the hour is to try and shift the focus out and take the conversations back channel so that both sides have an opportunity to try and climb off this diplomatic escalation ladder that they've been on for the better part of the last week. Meanwhile, it's not just this whole India situation that Justin Trudeau and the Canadian government is facing. For the last few years, he has been facing quite a few foreign diplomatic embarrassments. We all saw that clip with Chinese President Xi Jinping, which went viral at the last G20, Xi Jinping almost schooling Justin Trudeau. There was this entire controversy about Chinese interference in Canadian internal affairs. And now, of course, there is this issue of Mr. Trudeau making public allegations against Indian government officials in the death of Hardeep Nijjar, a Canadian. Someone who's worked closely with Justin Trudeau as a foreign policy advisor back in 2017-18 is Omer Aziz. He's now joining us. Thank you very much, Mr. Aziz, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. You had recently written a piece for the Globe and Mail where you basically said on this Khalistan question, India and Canada were not talking to each other; they were rather talking past each other. From your experience as a foreign policy advisor to Mr. Trudeau, could you explain to us, maybe give us an anecdote or two, why you felt that particularly on this issue, the Khalistan issue, both sides were talking past each other?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I served in government in 2017 as a foreign policy advisor. It was a very critical time because Donald Trump had just come into office. Prime Minister Modi had now been in office for 3 years. Prime Minister Trudeau had been in office for 2 years. It was a very critical time of global affairs where a number of the issues that we're seeing today, especially between India and Canada, could have been resolved or put on a better course. You know, this is what the purpose of diplomacy is. It is to keep talking. It is to seek out mutual interests and where we can work together. And then where there are challenges, we address those together domestically with our allies. And if we're invested in a bilateral relationship with the country, then we take their issues at least into consideration. An example that might show how they were talking past each other, it was just very difficult for the two foreign ministers to meet in that year in 2017. I remember it was quite difficult. So from where I sat, I had to advocate for the agenda and the issue and for the attention, time, space that, policymakers and principals should have applied to this. But what was worrying was that even where there were attempts when the Indian government did want to talk or the Indian foreign minister did want to talk, I often felt that we either didn't want to listen or we didn't have time to listen. And so that's a function of a lack of priorities, because I saw India as a rising power and that they were bringing this issue to our concern. And so it was worth addressing very seriously. Where we've gotten to now is a near rupture in relations. This is what happens when you don't have investment or interest in a country's bilateral relationship, where it's superficial. And what I'm hoping for is what I'm hoping for then, which is that diplomacy can prevail and not just, hard politics and tough talk.
Now, India has been saying, and even before Mr. Trudeau came out with these allegations, India has been saying that Hardeep Nijjar was a Khalistani, he was a separatist, he was a terrorist, he was wanted for a number of crimes here in India. There was an Interpol red corner notice against him, and Canada seemingly did not do much to try and bring him to justice for all of these crimes. The question then is, why would the government of Canada, and the Prime Minister in particular, by going public, why would they go to such great lengths to eulogize such a person, even to the extent of harming and hurting the diplomatic relationship?
Yeah, I mean, if the reporting is accurate, he was also a Canadian citizen, right? And hadn't been convicted of any terrorism laws that I'm aware of here in Canada. And so if the allegation was true, and we have no reason to doubt that it is, just given that now the reporting suggests that there were human intelligence, signals intelligence, and that the US may have provided the key intelligence to implicate agents of the Indian government, Indian security services in particular. So, I mean, the intelligence is there, and he's the sitting prime minister of a democratically elected prime minister of Canada. Could he have given someone else to announce this? Could this have been discussed privately, perhaps at the G20 and elsewhere? Sure. But I think the political calculation that was made, and perhaps the national security calculation as well, was that the prime minister has to get ahead of this and address this. Also, it was already being leaked that this has occurred and this issue is behind the scenes. And, with democracies, it's very difficult to keep information just close and away from the people often. So it was going to get out anyways. And I think Prime Minister wanted to be ahead of it and wanted to address it head on because it raises some very, very serious implications and consequences. I can't speak to Mr. Nijjar himself. I mean, there's been conflicting accounts of his background. I just want to say that, number one, to the extent that someone's just expressing themselves and it's just free speech, that is entirely protected and guaranteed within Canada's constitution. And no prime minister would dare challenge that essential principle. It's just part of the culture. But where things get dangerous, or where they could potentially get into tricky territory, is if there's any kind of fundraising, or if that speech turns into donations and those donations are going towards what another country may consider illicit or illegal activity. So once speech turns into money that crosses borders, now we're implicating foreign policy. And from where I sat and from where I sit now, that is where the issue should have been addressed, or at least taken seriously. At least goodwill steps, as I had mentioned in my essay, that we could take. At the same time, it's more complicated here, because it's not as simple as the Indian government gives a piece of paper and that says that, the prosecution here must prosecute and arrest someone. So it's not really how that works. I could flip the question as well, and I could say, if we take the reporting to be true, why would the Indian government go this far to assassinate someone on Canadian soil? They also could have followed legal and lawful procedures as well. So I think at this point, look, the relationship is near ruptured. The two sides are not talking to each other. I think that we need to get the relationship on better course. But my perspective here is de-escalation, work with the Indians where we can, and ultimately help resolve this issue. This issue should not be the one, Khalistan and this, the kind of politics of it should not be the one that disrupts the entire international global order. And that's what I worry is going to occur.
Mr. Aziz, you've also said that Trudeau, in a sense, is beholden to the New Democratic Party, his alliance partner, its leader, Jagmeet Singh, on whose MPs the Trudeau government's survival depends. It's not as if the Canadian Sikh community is pining for a Khalistan. In fact, out of that 700,000 plus Canadian Sikhs, a large majority, an overwhelming majority perhaps, want to have nothing to do with Khalistan. The question then is, why is Mr. Trudeau so beholden to such a tiny fraction or a tiny minority within that vote bank, the Canadian Sikh Punjabi vote bank?
Yeah, I mean, within the Sikh community in Canada, there is a large amount of diversity, right? We should never allow a few opinions to then define the entire community. And most of the Sikhs in Canada have ordinary concerns. And even when it comes to India, their concerns would have to do with family and business and visa and education and all those things, right? Improving a lot of their kids. These are universal concerns. Now, we do have a vocal minority that does support a separate homeland for Sikhs out of India called Khalistan that has its own movement. Most of them are peaceful as well, but of course there have been instances of violence. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the 1985 Air India bombing, which was a huge trauma, not just for India, but for Canada as well. And I know people who knew people on that flight. So we're not that far apart, the degrees of separation. And, the pain on this goes deep both ways, for Sikhs, for Indians, for Canadians as well. And ultimately, both political parties, to be very blunt with you, Conservative Party and Liberal Party, began doing this ethnic pandering to win votes, partially because they didn't understand these communities. Most of the politicians were white. They weren't interested in, what's a Sikh versus a Muslim versus a Hindu. They just, that wasn't what or what are the ways that people actually live here, because, in Canada, everyone seems to just get along. It's one of the great things of this country. One of my worries, just as a side point, is the communalism and sectarianism that has bedeviled India for so long and South Asia. It would be a real tragedy if we start seeing that here, right? So, 99% of people are safe. It's totally fine. I don't share Jagmeet Singh's accusations that every Sikh in Canada is facing danger. I don't think that's true. I think, if anything, we need to calm the temperature a little bit and allow rationality and sober analysis to reign here. But the diaspora elements of it does have support for Khalistan. It's a democracy, so people have to allow for multiple perspectives to be heard. And both Conservative and Liberal parties in Canada have tried to win those votes. To become leader of either party, you often have to have strong constituencies across the country in different communities. So the structure of Canadian politics and democracy allowed for ethnic diaspora politics to really thrive. And the politicians themselves often didn't care about these communities to that extent. They just wanted the votes, right? So it kind of became this perfect storm. And where it impacts foreign affairs is that, what a community is doing at home, if it impacts the world or the global stage, another country might be impacted by that and will raise those concerns. So I'm someone, by the way, who has always rejected this kind of ethnic divisive politics. I don't think it's helpful for any country or any society. It ultimately set us back. And I think, from foreign policy perspective, as I said in the essay, we can't allow for certain domestic constituencies or issues to distort our long-term foreign policy priorities, which are a lot more complicated and comprehensive and long-term than simply, a non-issue like Khalistan. Because if we're honest, there's not going to be a Sikh homeland out of India. Okay. This is not a major issue in India. And so I think that the distortionary effects on foreign policy is how we ultimately got here.
All right, Mr. Omer Aziz, thank you very much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. But as we bid goodbye, there is a final chunk that we need to play because now, once again, there is a huge focus on this Five Eyes alliance. Who are these Five Eyes? Who are these five countries? What is this intelligence sharing pact? How did it come about? Because in the context of this latest controversy between Canada and India as well, there is the Five Eyes angle now with US officials telling media channels and newspapers that it was the US which actually provided the first intel about Nijjar's death to Canada, about potential and possible involvement of Indian government officials. So here's our explainer segment on Decode as to what is this Five Eyes Alliance, who all are part of it, and how it came about in a historical context. Thanks for tuning in. The Five Eyes Alliance is a secretive and highly effective intelligence sharing partnership that has played a crucial role in global surveillance and counterintelligence efforts for decades now. Comprising 5 English-speaking nations, this alliance was formed to enhance intelligence cooperation with a primary focus on signals intelligence, SIGINT, as well as counterintelligence. It is once again back in the news after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau publicly accused India of killing a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil back in June. There have been Canadian media reports subsequently that some of this intelligence was shared with Canada by one of its Five Eyes partners. On Crux Decode, we will delve into the history, the member countries, intelligence sharing mechanisms, and controversies that have plagued this unique alliance. The Five Eyes Alliance consists of 5 member countries: the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, these nations share a common language and a long history of intelligence cooperation dating all the way back to World War II. The alliance was formally established in the aftermath of the war to address mutual security concerns and improve the sharing of sensitive intelligence. Historically, the alliance has been rooted in the 1943 UK-USA Agreement, a secret treaty that established the foundation for intelligence sharing among these 5 countries. The initial focus was on intercepting and deciphering communications, particularly from the Axis powers during World War II. Over time, this mission has expanded to encompass a wide range of intelligence activities, including surveillance, espionage, and counterterrorism. The intelligence sharing mechanism within the Five Eyes Alliance is highly structured and secure. Member countries collaborate through their respective signal intelligence agencies like the NSA in the United States and the GCHQ in the United Kingdom. These agencies collect vast amounts of electronic communications and other intelligence data, which is then shared among the alliance members. The principle of collect it all is central to their approach, which allows them to intercept and analyze an extensive array of information. One of the defining features of the Five Eyes Alliance is its commitment to the principle of intelligence sharing without exception. Information collected by one member country is readily shared with others. In fact, they are treaty-bound to do so, creating a formidable intelligence sharing network. This ensures that each member benefits from the collective knowledge and resources of the entire alliance. After Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made those explosive allegations against India for the murder of a Canadian national, Hardeep Singh Nijjar,
Over the past number of weeks, Canadian security agencies have been actively pursuing credible allegations of a potential link between agents of the government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
There have been reports in Canada that some of the intelligence came from one of the Five Eyes partners. While so far, which country was responsible for this piece of intelligence has not been revealed, it is most likely the United States. It, of course, has the biggest intelligence gathering resources under it. Which is why the US, UK, and Australia, 3 of the Five Eye partners, have asked India to cooperate with Canada and take this stuff seriously. India, for its part, has called these allegations absurd and a bit to try and divert attention from the actual issue, which is Canada's support for separatist elements who are working for a separate state called Khalistan to be carved out of the North Indian state of Punjab. The US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan took a rather cautious line, asking India to cooperate with the Canadian investigation into Nijjar's death. He also sought to allay fears that this episode has driven some kind of a wedge between Canada and the US.
We have also been in touch with the Indian government as well, and I will leave it at that for today, only to say that I have seen in the press some efforts to try to drive a wedge between the United States and Canada on this issue. And I firmly reject the idea that there is a wedge between the U.S. and Canada. We have deep concerns about the allegations, and we would like to see this investigation carried forward.
Canada has stuck out like a sore thumb among the G7 Western countries, all of whom are busy trying to court India. India is being seen as the one country in Asia which can act as a counterbalance to China. None of the other Five Eyes countries have publicly condemned India. All of them have taken a rather cautious line, asking India to help get to the bottom of this matter. While the Five Eyes alliance has been instrumental in countering threats to national security, it has not been without controversy. One of the most notable incidents in recent times was the 2013 Edward Snowden leaks. Snowden, who is a former NSA contractor, exposed extensive global surveillance programs conducted by the NSA in collaboration with its Five Eyes partners. The leaks revealed the scope of mass data collection, sparking concerns about privacy and civil liberties. Another controversy arose in 2018 when Australia passed legislation granting its intelligence agencies sweeping powers to access encrypted communications. Critics argued that this undermined the right to privacy and raised serious questions about the balance between security and individual freedoms. Despite these controversies, the Five Eyes alliance remains intact and it continues to adapt to the evolving security challenges. The member countries place a premium on the shared pursuit of intelligence and security objectives, which often involves the corroboration of intelligence between alliance partners. Now, this process helps ensure the accuracy and reliability of information, strengthening the collective ability of all of these countries to respond to these threats. So the Five Eyes is a powerful intelligence sharing partnership which dates all the way back to World War II. It's been in existence over the last 75 years. And over these decades, these five nations share their intelligence primarily in the field of signals and counterterrorism. While controversies and debates have arisen over privacy and civil liberties, this alliance remains steadfast in its commitment to sharing information and remains a crucial player in global intelligence efforts. The Five Eyes and the alliance's ability to corroborate intelligence across its member countries underscores the strength of this alliance. It is a unified yet secretive network in the world of intelligence and counterintelligence.
Presented by
At least in the state of Rajasthan, anti-incumbency will work in the BJP's favour. But at the same time, the BJP, it seems, has had a difficult few months when it comes to their state unit. It seems, at least according to experts, that there are multiple claimants when it comes to the Chief Minister's position. Obviously, there's the former Chief Minister Vasundhara Raje, but there are also reports claiming that Satish Punia, Gajendra Singh Shekhawat, CP Joshi, all are attempting to lay claim to that position. Can you bring us more context?
Well, see, as of now, BJP has made it very clear to all those leaders whom you've just named that the election will be fought under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi. So there will not be any declaration of the chief ministerial candidate from the BJP's side, and that is, of course, to keep those objections under the wraps, because there are, of course, various leaders who have aspirations. You have Vasundhara Raje, who is the former Chief Minister of Rajasthan and a very strong leader, and therefore you have other leaders as well, like Gajendra Singh Shekhawat, CP Joshi, Rajendra Rathod. So without taking any risk, BJP is giving clear indication that they will fight this election under the leadership and on the face of Prime Minister Modi. And once, if they form the government, then they will decide who's going to be leading the Bharatiya Janata Party there in the state. And that is perhaps the reason why that message, in fact, has been given to all state leaders, that we have to fight this election collectively. So there shouldn't be any, individual campaigning or etc. And that was the reason why, if you see that Parivartan Yatra, which happened in Rajasthan, that was not led by one person. There were 4 yatras, which was led by 4 different leaders.
Arun, thank you for those details. We'll continue to check back in with my colleague. As you can see, the Prime Minister in Jaipur. It's time for a short break. On the other side, in just a few minutes, more of the country's top stories. This is the Breaking News Show. The Prime Minister, as you can see on the visuals in front of us, in Jaipur. A little while earlier, we brought you visuals of the Prime Minister in a rally in Madhya Pradesh. Both Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan are due for elections. You'll remember this year, in just a few months from now. In Rajasthan, remember, the Prime Minister is there right now to address audiences. He'll be addressing crowds in just a little while from now. But in Rajasthan, his visit is of particular importance because remember, the BJP in Rajasthan has seen some disquiet within its state unit with various polls of leadership. Former Chief Minister Vasundhara Raje choosing not to attend rallies in multiple areas, seen as a seeming sign of her dissatisfaction with decisions being made by the central BJP leadership. So that disquiet very much remains. Remember, the Rajasthan state is currently ruled by the Congress government. Ashok Gehlot, the Chief Minister, is going to be launching that campaign against the BJP in just a few months from now. The Congress too in Rajasthan has seen its own fair share of infighting. Obviously, you must be familiar with this. Former Deputy Chief Minister Sachin Pilot's infighting with the Chief Minister Ashok Gehlot. So, two separate parties, both the BJP and the Congress in Rajasthan, with their own state party unit complications playing out. In Rajasthan itself, over the last few months, the BJP has carried out multiple yatras. We've also seen Home Minister Amit Shah and the Defence Minister Rajnath Singh address these yatras over the last few days itself. In one such yatra, we saw the Home Minister refer to the Sanatan Dharm controversy that was playing out down south. Remember, this is the controversy where a DMK leader made statements about the Sanatan Dharm. That was looked at as particularly interesting by experts, as an indication almost of what the BJP poll plan could look like in just a few months from now. Now, my colleague Arun with us to bring us more context. Arun, you joined us earlier in the day when the Prime Minister was giving speeches in Madhya Pradesh. Now he's obviously in Jaipur, two election-bound states. Can you bring our audiences more context about what lies in store here in Jaipur?
Well, see, Prime Minister Modi has a very jam-packed schedule today. Firstly, he started his day with a rally in Madhya Pradesh. Then he has reached Rajasthan, and after concluding his program in Rajasthan, remember, he'll be reaching to Delhi and then participate in another program of Deen Dayal Upadhyay, the statue. So now, as we speak, Prime Minister Modi is in Jaipur, and remember that today is the culmination day of the Bharatiya Janata Party's Parivartan Yatra in Rajasthan, and of course, Prime Minister Modi, has been welcomed by women there, and the state BJP has planned this visit of Prime Minister Modi in a way that all the work related to Prime Minister's rally stay.
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma.